somebody messaged us and said that they were engaged to be married, and their fiance, they found out that they were hooked on pornography, and she was asking if she should still marry him or if that's a deal breaker, if she should cut it off. What would you say to her?
I would say marry him if you're okay with that continuing and probably getting worse. It's
Yeah.
kind of a fatalistic answer,
Okay.
but like if that's happening at this point, like don't assume that he's going to change. Like when people assume that another person's going to change, then it's just a recipe for disaster.
Right. And I guess it would also, wouldn't you say it would depend on him, like his response to her discovering it and his disposition towards pornography?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's true. And it also depends on whether she's a professing believer and he's a professing believer, in my opinion. Just because if she's a professing believer and he's not, then what's she doing anyway?
Yeah. Like I would probably, would you say it might be best to seek counsel from somebody that knows the two of you and is a godly person, you know? So the most mature believer you know, and if you can discern that they're discerning, which is very difficult, uh, these things are complicated, but I think by and large you should pause the engagement, and here's why. Every client that I know that is hooked on porn has a rage problem, like 95%. So, and even some of the guys that have told me I don't have a rage problem, they actually will later come up and confess, well, no, actually I do. So I don't know what is going on there. My theory is that maybe porn is providing it's giving like a certain level of stimulation, and that high stimulation is causing them to just be really wired, and there's a level of irritability that comes with your spouse finding out that you're doing something like that. And so it's just a setup for years of work, like really hard, painful work that's unnecessarily painful. Because we're adaptable beings. If you were to break off the engagement, which is one of the hardest decisions you would ever have to make, it does seem like it would just be a period of time where if you were to meet somebody that's not hooked on pornography, that person and that person is godly, you would almost completely forget about your prior engagement.
Yeah.
I know that sounds crazy in the moment because it feels so real. Like this is the person I'm supposed to marry. This is my one shot. This is my one chance. But you'll hate yourself if you marry somebody that's addicted.
It's true. Yeah, it sometimes in the moment it seems like, well, we've already spent all this time together, like we've already maybe even like already planned the wedding, already spent the money, but have the long-term vision to imagine the inevitable, which is spending the rest of your life together,
Right.
or worse, you know, not, and just the pain that's going to be associated with that.
Yes, it's high risk, low reward investment. But again, not everyone is the same, right? So
Yeah.
it really comes down to get help from somebody. Like talk to somebody. Don't just make the decision by yourself. You probably you're when people are in that stage of a relationship, engaged to be married, unless they've been together for 15 years, you're probably not in the best emotional state to make a clear decision. You know, it's like all those feelings of love, right? Is just it's not like I'm not trying to say that it's fake. It's just not realistic, and that quickly will wear off.
Yeah.
And so the relationship has to be deeper than just you connect well. And that kind of goes back to the purpose of marriage. It seems like marriage is really, number one, to be conformed to the image of Christ. That's why you get married. But number two, there is the idea of, if you don't have self-control, it's to avoid fornication. But there's a clear difference, and this is so key, because this is one of the things that not just clients, like people at church, I've talked to this about. Oftentimes you'll find, like, we had one guy who was addicted to pornography, and he was using the passage, well, I'm burning, so I need to get married, right? But Paul's not saying, hey, if you're already like habitually going to prostitutes and fornicating and watching porn, solve that sin problem with marriage. That's not what he's saying. He's more saying, like, avoid fornication that you haven't already been ensnared in, right? I don't think Paul is thinking to himself, okay, so if you burn and you're like a slave to sin, then you should absolutely get married.
Yeah, agreed. And I think you mentioned the connection with rage and sexual morality.
Right.
I think you're right that there is the stimulation aspect, and there's also the aspect of somebody who's constantly going after the gratification of the flesh. In one way, is like the flesh is never satisfied, and so the flesh finds multiple ways to manifest, and it's like the more you're feeding it, the more severe the problem is going to become. And so, like, sexual morality, giving place to that and making provision for that is going to mean that it's also going to be cropping up in other areas.
Yeah, one of the pieces of armor is the breastplate of righteousness, and like, it's amazing. Like, it's not so much like being righteous is this magical guard against sin. It's more, he says earlier in the chapter, be angry and do not sin. Like, don't let the sun go down on your anger. So letting the sun go down on your anger is staying in this state of in the flesh. And so you're unguarded, right? For all these onslaughts to come.
Yep.
And if you think of pornography, if it's habitual enough, it's like going out to war without armor on. If you're
analogy.
So rage is just an added struggle that you're being attacked with because you're giving yourself to pornography. It's like even simple things like I heard a pastor say one time, this is amazing, that there are certain sins that you give yourself to, like, that are totally disconnected from pornography, like not even related, but because they bring you back into the flesh, you're more set up for an attack, and you have less power against it. So the idea of don't quench the spirit. What is the fire of the spirit other than his power, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like me doing something simple like lying last night to my wife, for example. If I lie to her, and it's like the next day I grieve the Spirit of God, and he maybe is not with me in the same way he would have been if I would have embraced the righteous pain of honesty.
Yeah, that's true. And like, when you think about the contrast in Galatians between the works of the flesh, he says the works of the flesh are evident, drunkenness, idolatry, fornication, all these things. And then the contrast is with the fruit of the Spirit. Now the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, etc. And so when you think about the works of the flesh, like, why does he call it the works of the flesh? Well, because it's something you're doing, like it's like a groove that you get into. Whereas the fruit of the Spirit is something that God is doing in you. But when you're in that groove, when you're in that like rut of the works of the flesh, it's like you start out, it's almost like you get promoted, You know, like you start out like you start out like bagging groceries, and like before you know it, you're like the CEO. Um, you just like you just keep going, and there's no like that's why repentance is so critical. It's not just a matter of like when I'm in the works of the flesh, like eventually I just grow out of it, or you know, change my mind, like okay, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that. Like that's why repentance is so catastrophic, because it's like it's being rescued from that rut that you've gotten into.
Hmm.